channel, James Copley here. The big news coming out of Sunderland today is that Michael Beale is no longer head coach at the club. He leaves Sunderland with a record of just 12 games under his belt. He won 4 of those, drew 2 and lost 6, a 33.3% winning record. A disastrous appointment by Sporting Director Christian Speakman and Sunderland owner Kirill Louis Dreyfus. Sunderland have slipped right down the table with losses to Huddersfield Town and Birmingham City in recent weeks. Now, just before we start to analyse things, just a couple of things I wanted to get off my chest. I do wish Michael Beale and his family all of the best. Obviously, the situation surrounding his niece Poppy is really unfortunate, and you do feel for Michael Beale on a human level, having lost his job at Rangers and taken a fair bit of flack, and having lost his job at Sunderland and taken a fair bit of flack. Obviously, his family situation's challenging at the moment. Sunderland has been a challenging club for him to come in and manage. It hasn't worked. Wish him well. Let's stay away from the personal abuse, which I've seen crop up on Twitter. It didn't work for him in a footballing sense. Let's leave it at that. Let's analyse that. And yeah, let's go from there. I would also like to say a speedy recovery to former Sunderland boss Tony Mowbray as well, who's taking a step away from his duties with Birmingham City for 6 to 8 weeks after a scan returned some abnormalities, Birmingham City say. Wish him all the best, and I wish Michael Beale all the best going forward. But in terms of Michael Beale's tenure at Sunderland, let's not beat around the bush. In a footballing sense, it was disastrous. There have been several PR gaffes by Michael Beale. There was a situation after the Hull City game at home where he really took on the fans and accused them of not supporting the team. That didn't go down too well. His popularity briefly recovered after a 1-1 draw with Middlesbrough was followed by a win against Plymouth. There was the Stoke game as well. Wins against Preston came too, but it's never really looked like working for Michael Beale at Sunderland, in my opinion. He got off to a massively rocky start because he had to apologise after the Coventry City game, his first game in charge at the Stadium of Light. Sunderland lost 3-0. He had to apologise to fans on his first game in charge, which was never ideal. And the man I mentioned before, Tony Mowbray, replacing Tony Mowbray was always going to be really difficult because he was so popular with the players, and he actually retained a lot of popularity with Sunderland fans as well. Not everybody wanted Tony Mowbray to stay, I do get that, but replacing him at Sunderland was a tough task. Now, that's not to say that this slide hadn't already started under Tony Mowbray, because they'd won 2-9 under Mowbray. But I think if you watched Sunderland and you looked at the data, you could actually see that they were performing well. But what was hampering Sunderland was the striker issue. Sunderland under Beale, everything's gotten worse. The eye test, they don't look as good. He's tried to tighten things up at the back, but Sunderland is still conceding goals. Their XG4 is worse. Their XG against is worse. Now, I know you can't put stock in XG fully, but it is a good performance indicator, and it rapidly declined under Michael Beale. And he's had no luck during his Sunderland career either, really. He had the Newcastle game to contend with. Sunderland were really, really poor during that. But the whole mood and feeling around the club hasn't been helped with the Black Cats Bar debacle, which wasn't necessarily his fault. I don't think Michael Beale's been helped in terms of recruitment. Well, I say it wasn't necessarily his fault. It wasn't his fault, but their recruitment hasn't really aided Michael Beale either. Sunderland needed a striker, and in my opinion, an experienced number 6. They didn't get any of those things in January. So I think you have to say that while Michael Beale has not been good enough by any stretch as Sunderland head coach, he is working under the parameters and with the squad set to him and given to him by Christian Speakman. But then in terms of Christian Speakman, you have to look at him and say he's working under the strategy and with the budget and money provided to him and set to him by the owner Kirill Louis Dreyfus. So I think with everything, with every failure at a football club, you have to look at things in terms of collective. The players probably needed to have been better for Michael Beale, but they've been hindered by the fact that they haven't had strong reinforcements in January. They're lacking experience, they're lacking midfield variety, and they're lacking a proper goal-scoring number 9. Michael Beale's coaching hasn't been good enough. He's failed to get a tune out of what is actually a reasonably good squad. Christian Speakman's failed to provide Michael Beale with what that squad needed to push for the top 6 in the playoffs, and Kirill Louis Dreyfus has failed or not wanted to spend too much money, and that's why we've sort of seen this approach which prioritises youth, and that has led to a lot of good stories at Sunderland. Let's not think that this is all doom and gloom. Sunderland have some really exceptionally talented players. I know he's coming for a lot of stick. Well, these next two players have actually Joe Bellingham and Anthony Patterson, two excellent players who've made mistakes in recent games, and that's unfortunate. But you've got Dan Neil, Trey Hume, Pierre Ekwa. You know, these are good footballers. Jack Clark, Patrick Roberts are the good footballers who are going to do well for Sunderland, continue to do well for Sunderland. But they just needed a little bit of help. And I feel like the parameters have been changed too much towards youth and inexperience. And it just needed that experience to balance it out. A Gooch, a Bath, a Pritchard, you know, something like that. I think Evans is lost in the first team in terms of on the pitch has been keenly felt. You need that number 6. But the other news coming out of Sunderland is that Mike Dodds will be the interim head coach until the end of the season, which presents a really interesting situation, because if Mike Dodds does really well in that job, then he could get it on a permanent basis, which would mean, in theory, that you would either lose Mike Dodds to another club if he did well at Sunderland, or at some point you would have to sack him. Mike Dodds is really well thought of. They really value him at Sunderland. He's really highly rated as a coach. You know, if you give him that head coach's position permanently, then you do run the risk of losing his experience and his talent at some point. Mike Dodds performed admirably in the games against Leeds United and West Brom when he performed the role after Tony Mowbray was sacked. Obviously, there was a loss in there. I think it was to Bristol City, if my memory serves me correctly. So I have faith in him that he can do the job. But this lines up a really, really interesting and massive summer for, I think, this way of doing things. Jack Clark's probably going to leave the football club. We know that. He's probably going to get a big bid and Sunderland will sell. That money needs to be reinvested. I think we've seen some excellent work done at Sunderland over the seasons, bringing these young and exciting players into the club. The appointments of Alex Neil and the appointments of Tony Mowbray were good ones. We have to say that. You can argue whether, you know, the Sunderland came to those appointments in the right way, but the record does show that those were two good managerial appointments. But this next sort of 6 months is crucial. It's a massive summer coming up. Who will Sunderland get to lead them into the new era? And what is the goal with this ownership group? What is the end game? Do they want to get to the Premier League? They say they do, but to get to the Premier League at some point, you're going to have to put your hand in your pocket, and we're going to have some long-term stability in terms of a manager as well. When was the last time a manager had a full season at Sunderland from the beginning of the season till the end of the season? I think it was Jack Ross in that first season in League One. The rest of the time we've had managers leave, come midway through the season, leave midway through the next. It's not a situation that adds stability to a football club, and I think Sunderland really do need stability to a football club. I know I've gone on a bit here, but I still think there's been some excellent work done at the football club in terms of the academy is bearing fruit. The investment in the academy has been great, but there still remains a lot of issues at Sunderland as well. And this appointment, I think, has really, really damaged the credibility of a couple of key figures at the club, and it's really, really upset fans as well. I think Sunderland fans, in terms of Michael Beale, they thought they were getting a young upgrade on Tony Mowbray, and that hasn't happened at all. And they've ended up with Michael Beale, who a lot of fans didn't think was going to work from the beginning, and a lot of fans were absolutely right on that. It hasn't worked from the beginning. You know, no slight on Michael Beale, but he was just never a Sunderland manager. You could see it. You could see that it was never going to work. Anybody that's covered Sunderland or watched Sunderland could see it wasn't going to work. Now, that's not to say he wasn't given a fair chance. I think he was. A lot of people said, well, the proof will be in the pudding. But I think a lot of us knew that it wasn't going to happen either. And it was reminiscent of a Simon Grayson appointment or something like that. It was tough to watch and all too predictable as well. And, you know, Michael Beale's tenure as Sunderland head coach runs from the 18th of December to the 19th of February, so 2 months. He only presided over 12 games, which I think, other than Niall Quinn's 6 games about 15 years ago, when he appointed himself as manager for that brief period in 2005, 2006, I think it was, is the shortest managerial tenure in terms of games played. It's insane. It's an absolute... It's a crazy story, let's put it that way. Anyway, I've rambled on in this video. I just wanted to get my sort of thoughts and feelings out there again. Thank you for subscribing. Please let me know, what are your thoughts on this decision to get rid of Michael Beale, the decision to have Mike Dodds in interim interim role until the end of the season. Is that the right one, or should Sunderland be looking to appoint a head coach now? Really interesting times at Sunderland. What does this mean in the context of Sunderland's season? I have no idea. But my main takeaway is that this isn't a normal football club. But thank you once again for listening and watching. We are really, really close to the 1,000 subscriber mark now. So if you could push me over the line on that, it'd be much appreciated. Thank you very much for watching. Cheers, everyone.